Good morning, everyone. The topic today is how to survive the hardware-assisted control flow integrity enforcement. Let's first introduce ourselves. Our coworker Bing Sun is unable to come, therefore we'll just introduce him first. Bing Sun is a senior security researcher. He leads McAfee IPS research team. He has extensive experience and knowledges in operating systems, information security, especially in advanced vulnerability research and exploitation techniques, along with rootkit detection, firmware security, and virtualization technologies. Bing has been a regular researcher for many security conferences such as Black Hat and CanSec West.
Hello, I'm Jin Liu. I am a security researcher of XFuture now. I mainly focus on vulnerability research, specialize in the vulnerability latency and exploitation. I especially have a focus on the browser vulnerabilities on the Windows platform.
My name is Chong Xu. I received my PhD from Duke University. Currently, I'm the head of the security research team for McAfee Network Security Business Unit. My focus is mainly on research and innovation for intrusion prevention. My team focuses on the security vulnerability research, malware ATP detection, and botnet detection. Also, my team feeds the security contents into multiple McAfee products, as well as the McAfee Global Threat Intelligence. Now here is the agenda. Our topic is how to survive the hardware-assisted CET, the control flow enforcement technology. So we would like to start from a little bit of history, where we describe the software solution first for the control flow integrity enforcement. And then based on that, we'll introduce Intel's new feature for that control flow enforcement technology, CET. And then we'll followed by the Intel implementation on Windows 10 for the CET. After that, we'll talk about how to attack those, especially for the control flow hijacking and arbitrary code execution on Windows 10 with the CET enabled. And then we'll conclude and have the Q&A. First of all, let's talk about the software-based solution, the software-based control flow integrity enforcement. We know if we want to attack the control flow, there are two ways to do it. From the front edge, when any indirect call is made, if we can control the target address, then we'll be able to change the call flow so that this call will go to the direction that we want and will land on the target address that we provide. This is the front edge. And from the back edge, obviously, when a call returns, it will return to the call, the original address, the return address that's been on the data stack. But if we have a way to change that so that when the call returns, it will return to the address that we provided, then pretty much we also hijack the control flow to any arbitrary location we want for the code execution. Those are the two ways of doing the control flow hijacking. Therefore, for the software approach, Microsoft has came up with two solutions. One is called the control flow guard. This is to detect the front-end hijacking. The basic idea is as follows. Let's look at the program on this side. On this side, if we see here, there's a function pointer, and then we assign this function pointer to this object. So in this function bar, then we make the indirect call to the function pointer that we assign to. This is the original code. But if when the CFG is enabled, then compiler will be able to add instrumented instructions. What it is added is here, the guard check ICALL. So what this does is that for any indirect call, there's a target address. And Microsoft wants to enforce a check for the validity of that target address. What that means is that when a program is being compiled, all the valid destinations of those calling targets are listed, so that there will be a bitmap to simplify which address is a valid address. And then when that program is loaded, and then obviously those addresses, the virtual address will be mapped. So also then those bitmap will now become a valid bitmap to indicate which are the valid target addresses. So when each call is actually made here, then before that, Microsoft uses the guard check ICALL to check whether or not this call target is in its known bitmap. When that is successful, then this call will be, our indirect call will be allowed to continue. Otherwise, if it's not valid target, then obviously, for example, if we are jumping into arbitrary location, then that target address is not a valid target, then obviously Microsoft will fail this process. So that's the basic idea for the CFG. This is used to address the front edge control flow hijacking. But there has been multiple ways to bypass this. And then if you guys are interested in this, then you can look at the Microsoft mitigation bypass bounty pages. And then from that, for CFG, Microsoft listed a lot of the known weakness of CFG along with what they think are the out-of-scope attack vectors. So all those are useful in bypassing CFG. So later we'll show also some of those, even with the CET enabled, are still valid. That's for the front edge. Then for the back edge, Microsoft implemented what they call the return flow guard. The idea is also very simple. When a function call is made, we know that the return address is on the stack, is on the data stack. And the attackers will try to modify that return address so that it can hijack the control flow. But what if we have a separate stack which also has a copy of the return address? And then when the real return happens, operating system will be able to compare the stored return address on this shadow stack along with the return address on the data stack. If those two matches, then obviously the real return address on the data stack is the return address. So that's the basic idea. In order to do that, also there has to be some operating system changes. If you look at the code here, before the call is actually made and proceeds, when we made the call, but before the real call proceeds, then there's some code before and there's some code after. What this does is that we see RSP is the current stack pointer. It points to the return address of the current call. So we move that, we copy that into this FS RSP, which points to the shadow stack, which means we're copying the real return address currently we know into the shadow stack. And then after the original code executes, before we return, then we'll see we're doing a comparison, which is the reverse process. We take the copy of the return address on the shadow stack and compare with the real return address. That is how this is implemented, which is the return flow guard. But there are two things that we have to notice. The first thing is store of this return address and the comparison of those return address, those are not atomic operations because they're at the beginning of this call and at the end of this call. So in the middle, after the RSP is stored onto the shadow stack, then if we have a way to change the shadow stack content, to change that return address on the shadow stack, then obviously we can change it to whatever we want to use. And then again, we can correct the data stack for the return address. The same address that we want to return to will be copied on both the real data stack and the shadow stack. That is the first assumption. But that's not easy to do because when Microsoft implements the so-called RFG, the return flow guard, then one assumption is this is put into a location nobody knows, which means we don't know the base address for this shadow stack, the software shadow stack. That's a good assumption, but in reality, everything is still in the memory. So there are ways to find out where this base address is. As soon as we get that base address of this shadow stack, then we will be able to see where the real return address we want to change to is. And then if we have an arbitrary read and write exploitation to get the read and write, then we'll be able to change the memory. So then that can be broken. That's the basic idea. So if you are interested, then pretty much this talk has the detail. So now we know that we have software solutions to tackle both the front edge and the back edge control flow hijacking. But those software solutions don't really work as they're designed. There are still possibility to bypass them. Therefore, Intel decides that such solutions should be implemented into the hardware, into CPU. This is where the control flow enforcement technology, CET, came. Okay, so Intel implemented this, so it will be come out as the hardware feature for the new processor families. The basic idea, as we said, is to prevent control flow hijacking. There are two capabilities, as we already said. First of all, there's a front edge control flow hijacking, and there's a back edge. For the front edge, what it is being done here is Intel introduced the so-called indirect branch tracking, so that when all the indirect call is made, then it wants to compare the address. And then also for the back edge, then we have this shadow stack concept already. That is implemented into the hardware now. So now we know there are two of those capabilities. Let's dive into the details so that we understand what exactly is being done here and how those can be used to prevent the hijacking. First of all, let's look at the shadow stack concept. As we know, we already described, for the software solution, you have the data stack, and then you have a shadow stack. Here we have the same concept, but the difference is that this shadow stack now is only available, operated by hardware, and also it's only available to be changed and modified through certain instructions, which is not the normal instruction. Special instructions are introduced, but the basic idea is still the same. When any call is made, the return address, first of all, it must be on the data stack, and then we'll copy that into this shadow stack. So when the call returns, then CPU will check the return address on the data stack compare with the return address of the shadow stack. If they don't match, which means that the data stack return address is now corrupted. Now we have a mismatch. So at this point, operating system will throw an exception, which is called the control protection exception. And it will give you different reasons of why this failed. So that's the basic idea. Now, this IBT, the indirect branch tracking, here is also the basic idea. Let's look at the program on the left. What we're doing here is we're doing an assignment for a function pointer, and then we're making an indirect call through a function pointer. And then when this is compiled, the compiler will add other instrumentation instructions into the binary code. So what are added are what is called the end branch instructions. Those are the end branch. So this end branch is at the beginning, and then right when we get into this indirect call, it has a second end branch. Those two come as a pair. That's easy to see. So now how does the CPU work in this case? CPU by itself, it maintains a small state machine. This state machine has only two states. The first state is idle state. The second state is the wait for end branch state. When we have the code execution, we see the first end branch instruction, and then the CPU gets from the idle state into this wait for end branch states. At this moment, it knows that a function indirect call will be made. And then obviously, as soon as it gets into this indirect call into the function, then it expects the second matching end branch instruction. So when it sees this instruction, then CPU will change its state from the wait for end branch to idle, which means now we're seeing a call is made, and then this call is actually made to the valid destination that we're checking. So that's the basic idea of this. But let's see, what if the attacker is able to hijack the target address and redirect this to some other location? Let's assume, in this case, RDX contains the address that this call wants to call to. But let's say if we are the attacker, we are able to modify this RDX, the value of it, so that we jump to some other places. In this case, for simplicity, let's assume that we're able to jump into in the middle of this function call, somewhere in the middle. And then obviously when it comes to here, what CPU expects is another end branch. But when it comes to here, the instructor is not end branch. Then obviously CPU knows that something goes wrong because we're not going into the target address that has the end branch, the other end branch as a pair, right? So that's how the problem happens. And then now, since CPU identifies there's a mismatch and there's a hijacking in place, then it will throw another the control protection exception with different unbranch as a error reason. That is how this IBT works. In order to use those, then new instructions were introduced. For example, for shadow stack management, there's a bunch of new instructions. If we want to increase the shadow stack pointer, then this inc SSP is used. If we want to read the shadow stack pointer, then this RD SSP is used. And also there's other two pairs of the instructions which are very interesting. As we know, different programs, different processes, different tasks are running at the same time on CPU. So each of those will have its own shadow stack. So when the task switches, then we have to switch to a new shadow stack. Those save previous SSP and restore SSP are used for the shadow stack switching purposes, so that it can switch to a new shadow stack that can be used for the new task. And then to write to the shadow stack, there's this WRSS and WRUSS. The second one, we can write to it in the user mode. And then obviously we can set the shadow stack to be busy, and also we can also clear the busy tag. We just described a little bit of, there's a shadow stack switch. So this is a very interesting operation, as we know, because we need to switch back and forth between different shadow stacks because different processes and the tasks are running. So this is how it is done through the current shadow stack and the new shadow stack. Now let's look at this. First of all, we have the current shadow stack here, and then we are using restore SSP given an address. This is where the new shadow stack we want to switch to. So as we see, it points to here. At this location, it has a what they call the shadow stack restore token. And this restore token, this bit is 0. And this part contains the address when this token was created. That means when this was created, at that moment, this is the shadow stack pointer. So what we're doing here is that replace this by a previous shadow stack token. Now because we need to go back to here. So since the current SSP is pointing to 0x1000, then we copy the address to here. And then this one marks it as the previous SSP token. So now this is created, and now we can see, since this is created, then this previous SSP token is in place. Now we want to do the store. We want to have the previous shadow stack to have this shadow stack token, so that we know we are able to go back to this stack when this is done, or some other shadow stack after the use of it. And then we put this, which contains the address of the previous shadow stack, which is here. And then this is the address, and then this 0 means is the shadow stack restore token. And then after that is done, so we will be able to have a new. Oh, this is the original. This is the original shadow stack restore token. So now we put the previous shadow stack token to it, and then after that is done, then we pop the SSP. Now SSP points to the new shadow stack top of it, so that can be used. Now this will be able to use for the new shadow stack. So that is how switch happens. Obviously, for the any new CPU features, there will be register that we can use to store all those for operation. There are CR4.CET that we use for the master enable bits, and then there's a bunch of the MSRs, the model specific register that we use to operate for those. Now, let's look at the operating system implementation of it. For Windows 10, in order to implement this, it has to make a lot of changes. The first change it makes is it introduced a lot of the enhancement for a lot of those operations. For example, thread creation and termination, fiber creation, termination, anti-continue, and get thread context, and then exception unwinder, control protection for page handling, and page fault handling, user mode callbacks. All those needs to be enhanced so that they can deal with this new feature. But then one thing that we want to notice is that for the latest Windows 10 Insider Preview 19H1, it doesn't really support the IBT. We're suspecting that because Microsoft already have the RFG in place. So to get rid of RFG to fully implement this IBT, it may take a lot of time. Therefore, it probably is deferred. Now let's look at the detail of those enhancements that we want to add to those some of the functions that is there. Jin will give you the detail.
Now you guys should know some special instructor and how did Intel do with the shadow stack. And next I will combine some special function in Fiber to tell you how Microsoft added into function. Actually, because it seems thread creations, we can't find the shadow stack creation. So we need to focus on the Fiber. Actually, the thread is most important, but the creation should be same. The first is a function you can see is PSP startup user Fiber shadow stack. This is a function which should respond for the shadow stack creation and to switch. And you can see there is a first function in the address of AB841. Its name is PSP reserve and commit user shadow stack. Actually, the function aims to create read-only page protection shadow stack page, and it also considers for the shadow stack extend. It will return the address, and next it will check if it is success. And you can see here from the address AB8451, the instruction is sub RAX8. The target is a shadow stack pointer. It will give a first keyword on the shadow stack's bottom, and then at the address of AB85858, it will move a function pointer in this place. Actually, the thread switch and the Fiber switch always begin with a special function. Here, the Fibers is NTDL RTL user Fiber start. When the Fiber thread has been scheduled, the function will begin with this function. This instruction will move the pointer into shadow stack so that when the Fiber thread be scheduled and the return instruction will check if the function pointer will match the shadow stack. And then it will use the special instruction WRUSS, write the pointer into the created shadow stack. And this is the rest part of PSP startup user Fiber shadow stack. And you can see, just like the last page, it also use the special instruction WRUSS, but this time he just write a restore token on the second D word on the shadow stack bottom. So the first is pointer of runtime user Fiber start. The second is the shadow stack restore token. It can be used for the switch context later. And the next is another function which named is switch Fiber context. It will schedule the new created Fiber on the CPU and begin with the NTDL or runtime user Fiber start. it can do the three things. The first is it will, at the address of 93295, it will compare 0 bit with a pointer at RCX plus 528. It will check the if the shadow stack is exist. If it exist, it will use another special instruction like RDSSP. It will read the pointer of the shadow stack. And then you can see the pair of special instruction at the address of 932AD, the restore shadow stack pointer and save previous shadow stack pointer. Because currently there are two shadow stacks, the shadow stack of a thread who will create the new fiber, and the another shadow stack is current created fibers, so it needs to do the switch. And at the end, the function also move to the pointer of a beginning function RTL user fiber set. It will move to the data stack, so that when the function use the read, the shadow stack pointer will match the data stack pointer, so that it will not raise the CP exception. This is the logic of switch and shadow stack creation. Next part is about the control flow hijacking idea, and Chong will talk the brief.
Yeah. So we'll now. We talked about the software solution for control flow hijacking, and we talked about the Intel's hardware solution for hijacking. And then we talked about the Windows 10 implementation for the CET enhancement. And then Jin used the example of fiber, the creation, and also switch for those to describe what are the changes that operating system must make to use those special instructions provided to do all the enhancement in order to use the CET. Now let's continue. Let's continue into how we can break it. First of all, we believe shadow stack, CET shadow stack itself, it defeats the the back edge control flow hijacking via the return address overwrite. As we know, the way how it does is through hardware, and then also at this moment, because only a certain set of the instructions can be used to modify the content on the shadow stack and to make changes, so it's not possible for arbitrary code to make arbitrary changes to those. Therefore, the shadow stack by itself is very secure. Therefore, it's not possible for anybody to tamper the content on the shadow stack because it's a hardware-assisted solution. So now the return address override, as we used to use, is no longer pretty much impossible. Second, shadow stack together with ACG and CIG. ACG stands for arbitrary code guard. CIG stands for the code integrity guard. Those make the arbitrary code execution even more difficult. Why is that? First of all, shadow stack pretty much it defeats the raw shellcode. We cannot jump arbitrarily anymore. And then, as we know, ACG, the purpose of it is to be able to load only the known code into the memory for execution. And CIG is that if we can load known code, then we have to make sure when the code is loaded, it cannot be changed. Then when those things work together, which means that we cannot arbitrarily load any code and change any pages in the memory for execution. And then even if some code is loaded, then it's not possible for any third-party code to be loaded, and especially those code modifies the memory and make it as a new executable. So those are pretty much no longer possible. But that being said, as we said in the previous section, the indirect branch tracking, which is a hardware solution for CET, is not implemented in the current Windows 10 implementation. Therefore, Windows 10 currently still heavily relies on the CFG for the front edge control flow hijacking. We know CFG is possible to bypass it. Those being said, a lot of the assumptions made here is that we need shellcode in order to have all the things work. But in reality, that's not really necessary. One talk we gave, which is the shellcodes are for the 99%. If you are interested, you can read that talk. What we proposed here is that we don't have to have the shellcode. We can go through the scripting engine. In this case, the example we use is a JavaScript engine. Everything can be done through JavaScript, and then we will achieve the same results. So pretty much we achieved create a solution that is shellcode free because we're doing everything through JavaScript. So that being said, now since we're using JavaScript, a lot of those say ACG, CIG, those are no longer a barrier for us because we don't really rely on arbitrary shellcode to be executed. We do in the JavaScript layer. So now the only thing we want to bypass is how to bypass either the shadow stack or the CFG. Now we understand what is possible. Let's look at the attack vector. We believe the following attack vectors are still valid and possible given the current implementation on Windows 10 for CET. But for the first two, code replacement attack and counterfeit object-oriented programming attack, those two are off topic, so we'll not touch those. We'll focus on the last three: data-only corruption, function pointer hijacking through race condition attack, and threat context hijacking by abusing anti-continue mechanism. Now, Jin will give all the details and examples of each of those attack vectors, how they can be attacked, and along with the screenshot of the results.
Okay, let's begin at the data-only corruption. You probably know about the data-only attack. We can use high-quality vulnerabilities to gain the arbitrary address red and white. After we got these capabilities, we can use this to change some key point data in some structure, and it can resulting in the hijacking control flow. And now the CET and CFG protection only protects the integrity of control flow, but not the integrity of data. So we can corrupting a program's critical data, and then it can lead the control flow hijack. There is a case, CFG bypass by abusing Ldrpwork Mechanism. This issues still exist in the Windows Insight Preview 19H1. And you can read this link to see how the Ldrpwork work. Basically, let's see the demo screenshot. Basically, we by the high quality vulnerabilities, we fake Ldrpwork structures and we insert it into the double linked list. And Ldrpwork naturally can change the memory protection. So you can see as the rest, this is the address of function RPC-RT4. It's a CFG check. We change the protection of this memory. The original memory is page read, and now it's page read and write. We can just write the return value equal to 1, and this CFG check will be bypassed. And then we can combine with the JavaScript engine Chong has mentioned. Then we can use the RPC module to call any function we want in JavaScript level. I think it's an elegant way to hijack the control flow. In the left, you can see by calling some Windows API, we can call the current process PEB. It was 237482600. And next, let's see some harder. It's about the function pointer hijacking through a risk condition attack. Because Chong have mentioned, due to the lack of hardware-based forward edge control flow enforcement, the IBT, and the in-memory target address of indirect call and the indirect jump is still susceptible to the risk condition attack. There are two cases. The first case is exception handler and Unwind handler hijacking through the risk condition attack. The root cause of this are the same. And the second case is frame consolidation Unwind callback routine hijack through risk condition attack. Actually, the two parts also happens in the exception handler. Let's see the first. The bug was found in the function named runtime dispatcher exception and runtime execute handler for exception. This one is the function who do the really work. And the another function is runtime Unwind EX and RTLP execute handler for Unwind function. These four functions are all in the NTDIAL module. This function can be exploited to achieve the control flow hijack. So the root reason is that the handler is first saved on the stack before it gets executed. So if we can find a small time window between the stack store and the handler invocation, it will have a possible to make a risk and condition attack. So the basic idea is we will call a function which have the problems a lot of time, and it will trigger the exception again and again. So in the function level, it will call the function which have bug again and again, so we can create another thread. In this thread, we can achieve the risk condition attack to modify the value in the original thread's data in the stack. And by the way, the exception and Unwind handler seems to come from a certain trust place. Actually, it should come from the MR data of a piece section. So there is no any CFG check against them. It will make the risk condition attack easier. Okay, let's see the code. This is a function in the case one. I only show the Unwind handler hijacking because the exception is the same as it. You can see there are a lot of write code. Actually, this is a time window for the risk condition attack. The red function, the function in the left is RTL Unwind EX, and the function in the right is RTLP executed handler for Unwind. This function will be called as the address of 6165 here. And finally, the runtime P execute function will call RAX directly. That is the Unwind handler. But you can see the RAX come from R9 plus 30H, and this pointer come from the RBP plus 1C0 plus a variable we can control. So we can use the risk condition by changing this value to hijack the control flow. And the red box give us a lot of time to achieve this risk condition. It's more easy because it have no CFG check. Next, let's see the harder. The frame consolidation unwind. This function is also a part of exception dispatcher, and it's also is a risk condition bug. And differ from the unwind handler, this consolidation have a callback routine. You can see the function handler comes from structure exception record dot exception information 0. This handler is valid by a CFG check before making this call. And nevertheless, there is also a small window of the time between the first exception code check in the CFG. You can see in the runtime unwind EX later, and the second exception code check for the final execution. The execution is in the function RC frame consolidation. During this time, we can find the exception record is on the stack. Thus, we can use a risk condition attack to change this value. Let's see the code. It's a little complex. At the left is RTL unwind EX, and at the right is RTL restore context. This function will be called as here, that address 63B0. And the left, the red code is the first exception check code for CFG. The CFG check is at the left bottom, address 6728. It will be called at here. There is a compare with the exception code to the value 8 a lot of 029. And if match, it will jump to the CFG check, and then it will jump to 639D. It's here. It will call another function, loader control flow guard enforced. And finally, it will to do some check and prepare for the parameter, and go here to call another function, runtime guard valid stack pointer. Finally, it will call the second exception code check, the right function, RTL restore context. And you can see at the end of the second exception check, the function will call RX directly. So this is a pointer from the structure like this. So even the first exception check have the CFG loader valid user target call target. We still have enough time to do the risk condition after it finished the chalk until the function finally calls the REX. Let's see the last. Thread context hijacking by abusing anti-continue system call. Anti-continue is a special function. It can change the current thread's context. The thread context contains a lot of CPU registers, include RIP, REX, RCX, and such a context change occurs in the kernel space. So all the user CFI enforcements cannot will become irrelative. So as I mentioned, anti-continue will take the thread context as its argument in the memory, and the anti-continue in kernel will not valid the most number of contexts, but except for the RSP and the CET state. By the way, there is some explanation for the special function KE verify context X state CETU. You can find the control flow and explanation in our slide for publication about the CET state function. This function aims to prevent the attacker to change the context but use some instruction like X restore. And but both factors make the thread content hijacking through the risk condition access possible. So it's also a risk condition attack. There are also two cases. The first is thread context hijacking in thread user mode initialization. It's about the function named loader initialize the trunk. Mr. Chong and Mr. Bing have do this topic. You can refer from the link. And now I will show the second case. We want to hijack the thread context in the exception unwind process. The function bug name is RTL restore context. You have seen. Let's see the code. It's a little complex. The code name is I showed a bug, and we can see at here, at the top of right, you can see the function we'll call ZW continue. The ZW continue is NT continue will internally call ZW continues. It will change the thread context in kernel. And the context record is as a parameter come from the RCX, but the place memory holds this context record is on the stack. So in this case, it will have a very long time window to do the risk condition. It will check if the exception code will match this, and according the different exception record to match different context restore method. So you can see at the right, by using NT-continuous call to restore context, and you can also do the fast context restore, or just use the special instruction X restore. But this function need to check with the KE verify context I mentioned, and there are a lot of ways to do the context restore, and finally it will jump to RC firm consolidation. So such a long time window, you can also use the risk condition attack to change the context record on stack. This is a screenshot demo. Let me explanation the register. You can see the debugger break at the function kernel32 is this value name. This is a hijacked control flow. The original control flow cannot jump to here. By changing the RIP into thread context, we change the address of this. And we also fake object as the RCX value. But if you want to use the NT-continue hijacking, you should also to change the value of RBP and RSP. I mentioned it cannot change the RSP value at random, but you can change the value at the bottom of RSP. It should match the return address of runtime restore context function's parent function. So when the function finally returns, it will also match the return address in data stack and the shadow stack. You must keep the function pointer matches. Otherwise, it will also raise the exception. That's all of the hijacking control flow idea.
Okay, we just show different ways that we can still make the control flow hijacking possible. And Jin already described several scenarios. Each of those are addressing different possibilities. Now let's conclude this talk. First of all, we believe that CET, the hardware solution, is definitely the direction to go. Because to start with, we already seen that the software-based solution is not adequate. It's good, but it's not adequate because there are still ways to bypass those software solutions. And then regarding the two functions provided by CET, the CET shadow stack is a good supplement to CFG, and it makes the control flow hijacking and arbitrary code execution more difficult. And by itself, shadow stack can also successfully block the control flow hijacking via the return address override, and therefore the ROP and also ROP based attacks. So by design, it successfully achieved those. But however, even with the hardware-based CET in place, then other type of control flow hijacking is still possible. Jin just showed that for the data-only attack and also anti-continue, then we still can use those to bypass the control flow hijacking protection. Because especially, let's say, for example, for the data-only attack, we're not relying on hijacking the control flow itself. We're relying on changing some of the data which will influence the different control flow transition. So those are the key for the success. Even with hardware solution in place, such scenario is still possible. But that being said, is that it is possible to still hijack the control flow, but then after we hijack the control flow, we have to make a way of doing something else to run the arbitrary code. Then with CET in place, arbitrary code execution after the control flow hijacking is becoming extremely difficult, if not impossible. That means that CET is still very strong in terms of providing the protection. The third point we want to make is that compared to the hardware-based, the IBT, the indirect branch tracking, the current software solution on Windows 10 is still not adequate because the CFG is still bypassable. Then last but not least is that as we see, a lot of the data that we're touching or we're modifying are in the process space. Those are the critical data that can influence the execution of the processes and threads, whatever the entity we want to say. So therefore, it's very critical that some of those meaningful data are moved out of the process space. That way, the critical data that can influence the execution of the process or threads are no longer accessible within the same process, even you have different threads running. As we see, for the race condition attack, we can run a different thread within the same process, which will be able to modify the data within the same process. If that data is outside this process space, then obviously that is no longer possible. So that is one of the things that we think ultimately will make this data-only attack more difficult. That pretty much concludes the talk today. And now we'll start the Q&A. So after this session, if you have any questions or you want the further discussion, please email us. So we have all the emails listed here. And also, at the end, we would like to thank MSRC because we reported the problem and they helped analyze and confirm those problems in a very timely manner. Moreover, we would like to thank our team, the McAfee IPS research team, for all the help and all the support. So now it's the time for Q&A. Any questions? Please.
So just a simple question. Was it mostly theoretical exercise by passing CET, or did you really use CET-enabled hardware?
We used the CET-enabled hardware. Yeah, but for the debugging purpose, because a lot of the current say Ldrpro, it doesn't really fully support all of those new instructions. So we have to make some our own tricks in order to make all those things work so that we can show you, like the code we show you actually is not directly from the existing debugger. We have to make some changes for those. Any other questions?
They asked the JIT code in the Microsoft Edge protected by CET. JIT code.
JIT code.
Yeah.
Where are the JIT code?
In the browser.
What do you mean?
So the JIT mechanism is a faster mechanism to support the execution of JavaScript code.
Uh-huh.
Right. So I'm just wondering that the JIT engine in the browser protected by the CET or not.
You probably means the IBT tracking for the JIT code.
Yeah, maybe that's another question.
Actually, the IBT is same as CFG, but the difference is it's auto instruction and other is software based. So this behavior is happen after the compiler. So the JIT is compiler dynamic. So I think it will not have the IBT, but due to the situation currently, there's no any IBT support in Windows 10, so it's hard to judge.
Okay, I see. So it means that it only protects the static code, not the dynamically generated code, right?
Basically, the IBT will have also a bitmap just like the CFG, but it's also hard to judge because currently we don't see any code of the IBT.
So because my current research is on the mobile security, so I know that the ARM proposed the PAC code, pointer authentication code, in their design, and I think the Apple has already implemented the PAC in their chip. So, but at present, I think the Apple only protects the code pointer in the code, not the data pointer. So, for example, given you vulnerability, common vulnerability like a big bubble in the iOS, so how confident are you to bypass the PAC? Because I'm just wondering how, because I believe the PAC code is stronger than the CFG from my perspective.
Actually, we do the data-only attack, and the risk condition attack is based on we have a language just like JavaScript. It can the first is it can provide us high-quality vulnerabilities, so it can to modify the data in the stack. And the second is the place where the vulnerabilities happens, just like the exception dispatch. We will write function have problems on purpose, so it will trigger the exception again and again, and thus it will guarantee a time we can change the data on the stack. Because I have no any experience with a mobile, so I don't know if we. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
So when during a function call, when for the IBT case, when the CPU enters into a wait for end branch state, how does the CPU detect an end branch memories? Does it store any contextual information that when it enters a wait for end branch state, to know that it's going to the end of that function and not any other function?
Yeah, but in general, that the code we showed, right, that the end branch is right within the function code itself. So no, the instrumented code end branch is inserted by the compiler, but then the CPU itself, it runs a very small state machine. But yeah, but as you know, when the call is made, then right, it will. The first instruction is that end branch pretty much.
In the new malicious function, if there's also an end branch there, how does the CPU know that it got to the right end branch?
Yeah, I think the chance for that is very slow. Probably we can talk offline for this question. Yes. The CFI check.
CFI check failure lead to a system? Actually, not.
Oh, you mean the CFG check?
I mean the race condition. If you use the race condition, you will fail a lot.
Right. So yeah, so that's a good question. For the risk condition, obviously you have to have ways to prevent the exception from failing the process. There are tricks that we have to do. So it's not described here. Huh?
You have
Tricks.
avoid the crash.
Yes. So you have to do something with the exception handler. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you all then.